Hey, everybody, welcome to another special episode of the Fantasy Fiends podcast. Today, we are talking about your favorite, well, a lot of people's favorite subject, mages and magic, which, let's be honest, that's kind of what makes fantasy books so much fun and so mystical and marvelous, because magic is something we don't get in our world. So being able to read it in fantasy worlds, that's the fun stuff. So I've got some awesome authors today to talk about their magic system and their mages. So let's meet the authors. Nathan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Thompson. I'm the author of the Challenger's Call series and the Soulship series.
Very cool. Natalya.
Good afternoon. I'm Natalya Capello. I am the author of the Ballad and Emeralds and Iron series.
Awesome. Aaron.
Hi, I'm Aaron. I'm the author of the Sword of Light trilogy and the Legend of the Gods trilogy.
And last but not least, Mr. Phil Tucker.
Hey everybody, Phil Tucker here. I write epic fantasy, and my biggest series was the Chronicles of the Black Gate.
Very cool. All right, so we're going to kick this off with we're going to softball it to get started. Tell us a little bit about your mage and your magic system. Anybody in, a few minutes.
I can go. Okay, in my books, the first series, the main character basically gets transported to a world that works sort of off of video game magic, but with different systems and different myths. Some magic is by sort of comprehending an ideal of something, like how you understand fire. What does fire do? What is its nature? Some magic revolves off of history and how you record history. So certain songs and certain writings, as well as certain artifacts constructed.
So it's kind of a mix of magic systems?
Very much a mix of magic systems.
Interesting. Now let me ask you, is it hard magic or soft magic? If Stevie, my co-host, was here, he'd be laughing his pants off at that question, hard or soft. But do you go for that hard, which is like a delineated, structured magic, or soft in the sense that it's kind of alluded to without really getting full explanations?
Yes, the first two types of magics do have certain rules that they go by that the people understand. But as the books progress, the main character also unleashes a magic that's not explained, that the people don't understand yet. There are no rules revealed as of yet. And so I like mixing the two structures. I write primarily game literature and lit RPG, which builds a lot off structure and benefits from showing structure. But I think there's also a good element where you do something that transcends the structure and just sort of breaks all the expectations briefly.
Interesting. Who's next?
I'll go next. So mine is my main character, Lorelei. She has magic that is channeled through song. At least that's her focus. A lot of the different main magic types have a focus. Some is song, some is hand gestures, some is actual like symbols or chanting. There's also other magic in the series that they come to discover that is more natural or wild. So mine is actually a mix between hard and soft as well.
Okay. Do you give an explanation of it, at least enough that the reader can sort of begin to understand the outline? Or is it more like, here's the magic and accept it and enjoy it?
Oh, no, I usually give an explanation of it, especially when it's the appropriate time, so that the reader will understand at least how it functions.
Very cool. Who's next?
Sure. Okay, next. So my magic, it's reasonably hard magic. There's some gray room, but it's mostly set up by rules. There's three elements: the light, the earth, and the sky, which essentially include, like, the light is stuff like illusions and fire, energy, essentially. The sky is weather magic, lightning, thunder, rain, snow, wind, and earth is organisms and the earth itself. And there's three gods that represent each of those elements. And essentially all magic comes from them originally, but there's certain people that can channel it themselves to control either their entire element or just parts of it. So there's like light mages, magickas that I call them in my book, that can create only illusions, or others that can make fire, and some earth magickas that can manipulate plants but not animals. And then the main character is quite special because he can manipulate all of the, in the Sword of Light trilogy at least, all of the element of the sky. So he can control everything to do with the sky, so lightning, thunder, rain. But he's sort of one of those series where the character doesn't realize he has magic at the start, and he's what I call a wild magicker at the start before he's been trained. So his magic is in tune with his emotions, and the series kind of starts with him on the run because he's done all this bad stuff by accident, and he just thinks he's cursed by this supernatural curse that keeps haunting him. Whenever he gets in trouble, everyone dies, essentially.
Interesting. And so is it like a clerical style of magic where it's like based on his faith and devotion to the gods, or is it simply the gods created this magic, dropped it into the world, and that's how it was?
More of the second one. The how they learn to control it is through meditation, and basically it's a force inside themselves that is limited. Once they use up the source of magic they have inside themselves, they can still perform magic, but then they'll start drawing on their own life force and eventually end up dead. And the other thing that is quite interesting that I created part of it is that your magic itself has a mind of its own, and it wants its freedom. So there are also demons in the book that aren't your classical demon. They're actually a person who's lost control of their magic, and their magic now possesses them, and they become a demon, basically in control of their own magic.
Very, very Warcraft of you. Phil, what about you?
I'll talk about the God's Blood trilogy that I wrote. Change things up a little bit, and that's set in like a ancient Sumeria parallel. And one of the things that attracted me to that setting was the sense that back then everything, whether or not it was sort of perceived as magical. So everybody was obsessed with cleansing yourself of taint, of like bad luck, of all these different rituals that could increase your chances of doing well and whatever it is you were trying to get ahead in. And so one of the things that was interesting is that there is magic, but there's a gradient of like what the reader understands as real magic to versus just superstition. And this is something I had a lot of fun playing with, but the actual magic itself is based on religious sort of devotion. The heroes are demigods, and their own power stems from how much faith the people have in them and in their deity parents. So at the beginning of the series, we're following two of these demigods who have lost all their powers completely because their parents have been removed from play. And as the series progresses, as they bring back the worship of the gods that sired them, their own abilities begin to increase. But it's definitely a very soft system in that they don't have go-to powers. They don't have like a routine fireball or something along those lines. It ends up just manifesting in ways that are just it was like a narrative magic. It's more like Gandalf, where depending on the circumstance and how much faith they have to call on, they are able to just sort of make things that are useful to them happen. So as an author, that was really great because it allowed me to move the plot forward however I wanted to. And as and narratively, that was very different from the old magic systems that I've been used to playing with, like D&D based or Jack Vance based magic systems where everyone's memorizing their spells and doing it their same thing over and over again. It allowed things to be a lot more fluid and to blend into this like superstitious magical setting in a much more organic way. That was a lot of fun to play with.
Interesting. Yeah, that reminds me of the American Gods story structure in the sense that all the gods are basically as powerful as
Right.
as they're worshiping the amount of belief, which is always really interesting to play with, because then you can play with, the lost gods who's got, like that, the one crazy worshiper, who's slowly going insane or something. You can play with that. That's a lot of fun. But then I guess you kind of have to deal with the nature of belief and faith and all of that too.
Well, I didn't get into that because for this setting, everyone is completely ready to worship anything as long as it will help them, right? So they're ready to worship. They're scared of demons everywhere. They're scared of ghosts. They have all sorts of religious people who promise that they'll help them whether or not they can. So they've got all these buckets of faith ready to pour into anybody's swimming pool. I don't know quite what I'm doing with that metaphor, but it definitely worked out well. And actually, the book that kind of got me going with that was Terry Pratchett's Small Gods.
Nice.
So that, I don't even remember the plot. I read that when I was like a very young teenager. But I do remember that system of like the amount of faith that you're able to accumulate, allowing you to become more powerful.
That's interesting. Now, I think so I don't know where this is from. It might have been from like older D&D, but there was like different, classifications for magic users. Like wizard is someone who goes to school and learns the things. Sorcerers, they use spells and cantrips. Mages tend to have sort of this innate ability, or it comes from within themselves to cast magic. Is that sort of how you play with it, or do you approach it from a different angle, the whole magic manipulation thing? Anybody?
I think that's a variable. Those terms to me have always depended on whoever's writing it. Like D&D, the sorcerer has their own innate magic, and they just have a limited sense of spells, whereas the wizard is the academic type, right? But I think if you go back like old school, like Lord Dunsany or like Jack Vance in his Dying Earth series, where he came up with the original memorization of spells that D&D pulled on, I think they were just interchanging the terms. They weren't systematized in that fashion. And I don't think the reader necessarily is going to bring that expectations to it either. Like if you call your innate magic user a wizard, I don't think they'll cry foul and like throw your book contemptuously across the room because you didn't call it a sorcerer. I think there's definitely a little bit of leeway. But I think what matters with those terms is how you use them in your book. And if you signify that one name equals another ability, then you got to stick to that. But I mean, the other guys here can tell me if I'm off base. But that's my understanding of that question.
Yeah, no, I've never really. I did not realize that there was a different classification for each one. But I'm sure there was at some point in someone's book. But like I said, I use magicers in mine rather than mage or wizard or sorcerer.
I feel like it stems from the origin of the word. Like the Latin roots or whatever the roots would sort of determine. This is something that I based off with zero research. So, I kind of just made it up, but it makes sense to me that, the word wizard, which has a different origin than the word mage or magi or whatever it is, would have sort of a different connotation. According to their approach to learning or using or practicing magic. So that's just something that I thought of, which helps me. But
I kind of go along the same lines. My learned magic users are called magus or magi, whereas the ones that come innately or have sorcerers, and that was actually just introduced in my third book that came out today, Canticle of Magic. I actually introduced a sorcerer into it. So I think, if you introduce it and you make it clear to your readers, the definitions or the differences between each, they'll go along with it instead of being, like Phil said, being like, oh, a wizard is this and it strictly has to be this. I agree with Phil. I don't think they really care that much as long as they understand in the context of the story they're reading.
Yeah, the same. I think I remember reading somewhere that the basic definition of magic is just something unexplainable or the unknown. And a lot of words I found for wizard or magi translate into learned. And it feels like, since it is something that's either not real or hard to explain or unexplainable, the author themselves sets the tone for each individual story, or the game creator sets the terms for each individual game.
Interesting. Now, here's a question. Now, and we're all familiar, I assume, with Brandon Sanderson's 3 Laws of Magic, which basically give us a way to structure magic that it makes sense to the reader, and it also makes sense to the story. But do you ever find that structuring the magic sort of loses or makes it lose the mysticism or the mystique or the marvel of magic? Like, it stops being something fantastical and it just becomes another science, essentially. Do you find that? Because it happens to me a lot where I'm reading a book and I love this magical world, and then the more I get to understand the magic, obviously it helps me to understand, okay, why what this guy is doing is either super badass or super small. But then it stops being, oh my God, what's going to happen? What could, it stops being so mystical for me. But I don't know if that's something that happens to you.
Yeah, it's something that it's basically, it feels like a trade-off that we work with, is giving the audience a tool to hold on to versus kind of taking them for the ride, wrapping them in mystery. And I think you can do both. I think it depends very much on each story. Like with my story, the audience, I try to make the introduction of the understood magics fantastic. Like, there's this colorful display and how the character works to reconcile opposing magics in him. Like, he finds he's innately good at earth and innately good at air magic, but the two ideals conflict. And so he has to come up with a third ideal to meet them in the middle. And so I have this scene where he works through the idea of lightning, how earth and air connect. And afterwards, it maybe does lose a hint of the magic. But I find then, if it's from what they understand, the application of how you use it can excite them and give them wonder, or, like they said, interested in the creativity, like, oh, that was badass. But I also find it useful to introduce new types of magic after that. Like, again, so the story magic in my story is everyone understood, but then there's something new that no one's figured out yet that they sometimes stumble across.
Yeah, I find with the laws in mind, I found it more important to have the limits straight up than the actual rules, I guess, rather than taking away all the mysticism by making really strict rules about what can and can't be done and how it has to be done and things, rather having a limit just to more on myself as a writer than on the characters, to make sure I don't go and essentially pull something out of my house to save the day in certain situations and things. I think that's sort of the limitations, like they can only use so much magic, or you risk dying or losing control of yourself. You won't have control of what actually happens and things like that.
I can agree some part on the limitations becoming more of something that would be a science rather than just magic, since magic is kind of science. It's a science that we just haven't yet been able to explain. But I like to, in mine, I do have some rules and limitations and such, but I like to use the limitations also as interesting story things, such as with mine, my limitation is they have a sort of pool of, it's called aether. They have a pool of aether, and the aether they get back is through things that make them happy or things that bring them joy. So my main character, she likes drinking and she likes singing. So if she does these things, she'll refill her aether. But if she's in a point where she can't do these things and it's low, that prevents her from doing certain types of magic. Or if she gets depressed, that could lead to an interesting story thing of her unable to do something.
Yeah, so that's sort of the reason that these 3 laws were coined, is that you have these story elements that you can that structure your story and give you something to play off of. So I can understand the need for it, but sometimes for me it feels like, oh, magic when it was first. I mean, like, look at Gandalf. How is Gandalf supposed to defeat the Balrog? We never actually see what he does. This spell and that spell and all of that. It's just the Balrog is defeated. Holy shit, Gandalf's a badass now. So that unquantified magic in a way can be more, I would say breathtaking or awe-inspiring than the limited stuff.
I'd say that it's interesting to tease apart like Brandon Sanderson's 3 rules versus what he actually chooses to then do in his books. In his rules, and I think I remember it correctly, he says that you can have soft and you can have hard, but in order for it to make it something that the readers enjoy, there has to be internal consistency. And the softer it is, the less it can be used to like solve the plot.
Yeah.
But so I think he like accounts for like Gandalf's magic within his rule set. But then what he does is he goes extremely crunchy, and he's like, if you take 2 milligrams of copper and you add that to like a little swirl of Pepto-Bismol, you can now cause houses to turn blue, and it has to be exactly that for that to work. And what I find when I read his books is I get less a sense of wonder and awe like I would with Lord of the Rings. And I get more a sense of appreciation for his intelligence.
Yes.
Because what he has to do throughout his books, he has to continuously one-up his own rule set and my own imagination and use the logical foundation that he's put into place to come up with innovative uses that I, in retrospect, see as obvious. So when his people enter a situation that you're like, all right, how is turning this house blue going to help him in this situation? And he pulls something out that makes sense and is in accordance with his rules, but is a completely innovative way. You're like, oh, wow, that's great. I really appreciate how clever he is. And these characters are just being really smart. It's like a really good heist movie where they're faced with a challenge and they just come up with a brilliant way to overcome it. So in that sense, you're not getting that sense of Gandalf wonder. You're getting just like, this is a really smart guy who's using these creative tools to MacGyver his way through these situations. But I think his actual 3 laws do allow for folks like Gandalf or Harry Potter and so forth. But the magic is more just like, we're going to just use it as we need, when we need, for more of a sense of building that sense of breathless atmosphere. So, yeah, I think that little difference is important. And I find that your personal style can still accommodate his 3 rules, regardless of where you fall on the spectrum. And you just have to be aware that if you have that soft magic and you have Gandalf pulling out solutions whenever they need them, the reader's going to start finding them to be kind of cheap. But that's why Gandalf doesn't really take center stage in The Lord of the Rings with his magic and just solve all these problems, like just getting the eagles to fly everyone to Mordor, because the magic being so soft prevents it from violating Brandon Sanderson's rule of you can't therefore use it to get out of jail.
Yeah. No, I like that analysis though. Instead of it being sort of a holy shit, this is amazing thing, it's like, this is a very, very well crafted story. Sort of like the difference between Inception, where everyone was like, wow, this is amazing, and then a movie like Lord of the Rings, where it's like, this is something, or Avatar. Avatar is another one where I don't think anybody was thinking, wow, that was a really interesting twist in the plot, or it was a really interesting thing. It was like, holy shit, there's this world and there's these creatures and it's breathtaking and awe-inspiring. Whereas Inception, people were like, oh my God, let's analyze and dissect this. And it's a totally different approach to the exact same thing. Avatar and Inception are 2 breathtaking movies for 2 totally different reasons. And so I like that way of thinking. Now we got a question from the audience, from Angel Hayes. What is your favorite spell, or I guess I'm gonna say magical ability used in your books by these characters? You don't try it, if it's a spoiler, just give us little pieces, but let's see what you got.
I'll jump in. In my Chronicles of the Black Gate, in book 3, this is a minor spoiler, but I don't think anyone really cares. One of the point of view characters, Audsley, ends up taking a demon into himself in order to survive events in book 2. And the demon, is obviously a magical entity. And what it does is it gives him insight into fashion, perfume, calligraphy, all of these really rarefied cultural pursuits that allows him to navigate society based off of the Japanese Heian. I don't know if that's how you say it. The 10th and 11th century Japanese government, where your importance or your ability to carry weight was based off of your cultural accomplishments. So using the demon's insight into this society, he's suddenly able to basically do whatever he wants and acquire clothing and money and houses because his poetry is so on point that everyone assumes that he's this incredibly powerful and rarefied gentleman, and they just give him everything based off of that assumption. So it's not really so much directly a spell, but it's like a magical way to cheat the very cultural norms of a society that would otherwise wouldn't give him the time of day. So I had a lot of fun, instead of using magic for like his ability to compose haikus on the spot, just basically repeating what the demon's whispering in his ear, and therefore getting whatever he wanted or needed to get through his quest.
That's pretty cool.
I could go. I like the soul current in my books. It's the third type of magic that I was talking about before. The soft magic in my books. I like the challenge of having to compare it with the hard magics and to keep it from overexploited. And I've found that when I do use it, I can make it relevant to the world itself instead of a plot device. As people learn more of it and just start asking more questions, like, this is supposed to kill you, why are you able to keep using it? This is costing you something, but you don't know what it's costing you. And I like the ability it lets me expand the story further. And the script I have to write for using it's kind of hard too, so that's a fun challenge.
Very cool.
I can go. So mine is a little bit more of a character development thing, and there is a little bit of a spoiler. My character had been in a magic school for a while, but she ended up getting expelled because her magic was a bit out of control and she was a bit reckless. What she mostly knew how to do was a bunch of manipulating elements. Her favorites were like wind and fire. So later in, I think, the second book, she actually learns how to charm people and put them to sleep, which it became my favorites because it was a development for her realizing that she could go beyond just the basics that she learned about elemental control.
Still there, Andy? Have we lost Andy?
Sure, there he is.
I'm still here.
My favorite, I think, is from my books at least, is actually probably the dark magic, just because it goes against everything else that I said about my magic system and all that, and they can basically do close to whatever they want depending on their experience. And so one of the items that the big baddie created in the first series is called a soul blade, which can be used to basically steal other people's magic if you stick the pointy end in them temporarily if they don't die. So they'll take whatever store of magic you have in you at the time and are able to use that to manipulate lightning or fire or whatever your particular magic brand is. And
So wait, is it like, let's say I'm an earth mage and you're a sky mage and I stab you, do I get sky mage powers or I just get your magic reservoir for my powers?
You get sky mage powers. So it's usually only wielded by dark magicer, which have a fairly undefined skill set of powers, where like a basic demon might be able to teleport and move fast and be super strong and stuff. Whereas the big baddie that's been around for 500 years is on par with the gods, basically. And these soul blades, say my main character with his lightning powers got stabbed, and whoever stabbed him with the sword has control over the lightning and the weather, unless he survives, in which case, if he survives, then eventually the magic returns to him. If he dies, it's called a soul blade because it actually absorbs the soul as well, which gives them the power to rejuvenate that magic essentially and wield sky magic forever as long as they have the sword.
So it's almost worth it to kill the people.
Yeah, the idea is you kill them. it's wielded. The first one that shows up is wielded by a demon who stabs a few people.
Interesting. I was thinking of like, you capture a bunch of mages and you stake them with the sword, but you keep them alive to recharge the magic. But if you could just get their soul and their magic, way easier that way.
Yeah, some of the people that get stabbed, it's doesn't look good for the heroes after that first book.
Nice. All right, another question from Sarah. What is the craziest thing you've ever had a character do with magic?
I'll go
Sarah,
first on this one. So my main character had some problems with controlling her magic, and at a certain point in the series, she lost control where she couldn't actually maintain. When she cast a spell, she couldn't maintain control of it. So she intentionally cast a spell and just let it go to defeat this big bad enemy mage that she was fighting, and it kind of hit him on the side of a building and like destroyed a whole bunch of land along with it.
I think the cleverest little plot point I ever did with my magic was I had a character who could manipulate people, essentially. So she could change your memories or make you do stuff or completely remove your memories, essentially, and make you a different person if you wanted. But you don't really find out. I won't say who it is because it's a bit of a plot twist, but she does it to herself to completely remove her own memories in order to escape her father, essentially, who had a lot of different, who was a dark mage and had collected a lot of different powers to try and track, so he could manipulate his children and everything. So, and then she removes her own memories in order to escape from him.
Yeah, so in my God's Blood trilogy, in book 3, they have to go and resuscitate those dead gods I spoke about in the beginning, except they're in the wrong underworld for where they're based. They're in a different country, and they only have access to that country's underworld. So I had a lot of fun having them use the local sort of farrier of souls, taking them into the wrong underworld, and then they had to cross sort of like through hell to get to the next underworld, which was just a lot of fun, because the one that they went into was based around the closer you are to the underworld deity, the more like in heaven you are. So the further you walk away from it, the more you're walking into hell. And just whenever you get to play around with an underworld, it's just so much fun to throw in whatever you want. And I mean, that's why everyone reads Dante's Inferno and no one reads Paradiso, because you can just put in all sorts of crazy stuff. And then the idea, the metaphysics of them finally crossing from that underworld to the next, because they kept looking for like a barrier that you could like chisel, pierce, and like step through, but there wasn't one. It was an infinity of space within the first underworld, and to get through, they had to do this psychological sort of reconceptualization of where they were now that they were in this underworld. Anyway, it probably sounds like I'm babbling, but it was very fun to just put myself in that sandbox where I could extrapolate whatever rules and whatever realities I wanted based off these ancient underworld concepts and muck around with it and just throw all sorts of nasty things and basically torture my characters. So that was good.
Very cool.
Always a classic. The craziest fun thing I felt like I've been able to do is in the third book of my first series. The character gains the ability to summon his stronghold from wherever he's at periodically. And at one point, he needs to take out an enemy stronghold. And so while forgetting to let his friends in on all the aspects of the plan, he actually gets inside and then summons his castle from the ground while inside the other castle.
Real Rick and Morty there.
Probably, yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Good man, Aaron. All right, now shifting gears a little bit away from our own books. Is there a magic system or a mage, sorcerer, wizard guy that kind of, or woman, obviously, that kind of is the one who got you hooked? Like Gandalf is obviously a classic because he's Gandalf. You know, you got the Balrog, you got the Shadowfax, you've got coming over that hill, badass scene, right? Lots of cool stuff there. But is there another mage or magic system or thing that really made you decide, yes, I want to write like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Are you guys familiar with Raymond Feist's The Magician's? Actually, I guess it's called the Midkemia Saga.
Rift War.
The Rift War. Anyway, his first two books with Pug and Thomas and all that. I just absolutely loved Pug's journey to power. And I must have been 12, 13, I think at the time. So like the prime age to really be impacted by something. And the fact that he was the protagonist, but struggled so much to get there. And it was only until much later in the book that he's exposed to a different magic system that really clicks for him. That entire arc was just fantastic. And I remember being so caught up in his struggles to manifest what I knew as the reader was going to be his protagonist's ability to be, super important to the plot. But for the longest time, he was just unable to get there. And there's a sense of potential he wasn't fulfilling. And that was just fantastic. And as I remember my 13-year-old self sitting down, I think, to try and write my first best-selling series. That was what I assumed it was going to be. And I realized one chapter in that I had simply rewritten the first chapter of The Magician, like almost verbatim. And I had this moment where I sat back and I was like, I can't do anything with this. I'm going to be accused of being a horrible hack. I am a horrible hack. So I just tore the whole thing up and threw it away. But I was really impacted to that degree, by Pug and his journey to become Malamber. So that was fantastic.
That was kind of a soft magic system, no? Like there were some rules, but I remember it was fairly undefined.
Yeah, it's like we're upset, so we're going to just burn everything down as we need to, depending on where we are in the plot. Like there was no sense of what really was or wasn't possible, or what his limits to his spell abilities were. It's just, there was very definitely a soft magic system.
I really liked Harry Dresden. I just felt like he made magic fun from Jim Butcher's series, The Dresden Files. He made cool toys out of different things. And and actually I think it was something I thought I heard Brandon Sanderson say once in an interview or something. He said, I'm known as the guy that makes interesting magic systems, but I'd rather be known as the guy who examines what interesting magic systems do to people. And I liked that aspect of exploring the consequences or the effects it has on people and how it changes them.
That's cool.
I can't say for a book per se or a novel per se that I had a mage that I was like, I want to write like that mage. Mine was more off of game systems, mostly World of Darkness Mage the Ascension. I used to play that a lot as a teenager. So a lot of that influenced my ideas about magic. Favorite mages, though, I'd say it's up between Polgara the Sorceress. I loved her in the Belgariad series. And Shannon Maguire's Toby Day. I like her marsh magic system was really cool, where it was just a bunch of like hedge magic stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say Valkyria, David Eddings. It was one of my favorite books growing up. And I don't know if I so much brought the magic system or like enjoyed the magic system so much as the whole world with the gods, and you kind of like the Chosen One. I loved it at the time. These days, I'm kind of like, it's a little predictable and prefer to have some sort of twist along those lines. But I did like the magic and the sorcery, and I can't remember half the characters. It's been so long since I've read those books, but I know he was one of my favorite authors growing up.
Very cool. All right, a question from the audience. Do you ever worry that the magic... Oh, I'm sorry. Were you talking still?
Oh,
I was saying, do you worry the magic...
No, you
go ahead. All right. Do you ever worry that magic could distract from the plot and characters? From what it seems like, you guys are pretty good at making the magic enhance the characters. But have you ever found it where you were writing and it was just like the magic consumed too much of the story that you had to change things up to make it more character driven?
I think in my earlier books that I wrote under a different name, yes. I think some of the magic did take away from some of the characterization of the story. But since then, I've learned to focus more on the characters and what the magic and the plots can do for the characters, or how they expand on the characters' personalities and growth.
Yeah, I think I found I had a bit of magic creep in my series for a while there. It just keeps getting more powerful, and it means that the characters without magic tend to fought become less and less important. Which I think I was telling you earlier, my series is separated by different eras. So the third trilogy, essentially in the same world, magic died, and so all the magic system I had in the previous two series is gone, and it's basically people in this world that had magic that could heal and grow crops and all sorts of things suddenly gone, and it's sort of the aftermath of that, and people questioning their faith. Some people still believe in the gods, others believe in different things. Some believe the gods were these benevolent people that were manipulating humanity for all these years using their magic and stuff. And so that I just used a way of taking away from magic, but at the same time creating a new story that was still based off magic being there. And as the series progresses, decided to add in a new type of magic as well.
I have the opposite problem. Sometimes the other elements get in the way of the magic for me, which is usually a sign that I'm keeping everybody too held back or being too careful. And I don't know. I feel like sometimes there's a really good moments to just cut loose and let it introduce and change things, as long as you're consistent after that, as long as you examine the ramifications of, oh my gosh, this guy just rose a castle out of the ground, didn't tell anyone. Let's be mad at him for like 3 more books and make sure he doesn't ever do it again. Let's give him a support group to make sure he doesn't do something else crazy. Yeah.
I actually think that magic, to step back a second and get a little meta, I think magic is the excuse that we give our heroes to become relevant and important on an epic scale. So like, why does the farm boy end up talking with queens and kings and generals? Like, why does someone who starts off as an orphan in the street end up becoming involved on national level politics and saving the world? The only reason we can usually justify that, and the reason why I think most fantasy books have magic in the first place, is that it gives the character a unique, necessary ability that makes them relevant on that level of importance. So I think the magic is actually usually fundamental to the plot in a fantasy novel. Like, whatever it is, like their chosen one ability is what propels them into the limelight and allows them to face Sauron or whomever. So I think that it's actually it's not that it distracts from plot and character. I think it's actually integral to plot and character. There's very few examples of fantasy novels with no magic in it. I think like K.J. Parker, stuff like that. So it's a great question, and I think Aaron actually hit the nail on the head for me, which is that even though it's integral to the plot and you need it to get your character up there into being running the show, the big danger over a long series is power creep. Where, for example, I think Jim Butcher has said that Harry Dresden was becoming too powerful by, I think, roughly where the books are now. And he's actually put into play some things where he's going to knock him down a few pegs. Because every book, you need to have a bigger light show. You need to outdo what happened in the last one. You can't continuously defeat the bad guys with the same trick. So, yeah, in the Chronicles of the Black Gate, I ended up having the same problem where by the end, like, it's like, how do you top what you just did in the battle with like the 10 dragons and the nuclear bombs and stuff? Now it's the next battle and you're like, what, just 3 nuclear bombs, 4? And I got to a point where I actually had to sit back and remind myself that the whole point of these battles and these novels is that they have to be invested in character stakes. So I was getting distracted with ever more potent and powerful spells and always trying to outdo myself, which was a losing proposition. And I had to go back to like what was emotionally at play for the characters in these battles. And in the end, and when you do that, when you bring it home there, like the size of the light show stops mattering, and what really matters is what's at stake. So that's what I had to relearn like 4 books into the series. I had kind of forgotten because of that power creep danger. And once I brought it back home again, then I was able to stop actively doing like an arms race with myself and instead just focus on the consequences, and that allowed things to sort of simmer down and return to a more manageable set of parameters.
Interesting. Now, if you could We'll go a little bit dorky here. If you could have any magical ability from any of the books that you read, which would it be? I feel like for me, the one that Matt has in The Wheel of Time, where he's super lucky, that would be a really, really fun one to have, because you could get away with a lot of stuff, and it's not like this big flashy thing, but it's just this low key power. What do you guys think? What ability, magical mage ability, would you have from any book or series that you've read?
I think we're all taking a minute to think on that. There's a lot.
Absolutely. I feel like Rincewinds would be kind of a cool one from the Terry Pratchett series, where he's got one of the 7 spells that made the earth.
Right, the one where he can't die.
Yeah.
I think to have it in the real world puts a big limit on it, because the second you do something flashy, you're going to be grabbed by someone and dissected. So I might go for like a Granny Weatherwax kind of magical ability, where I'm just simply given the sheer strength of personality to take care of people who are important to me and make sure that my home and everything isn't messed with, and just generally eyeball people and get them to sort of, I don't know, stop messing with me and my family, I suppose. I'm trying to think if Granny Weatherwax ever actually does flashy magic. Nothing's coming to mind, but that just could be my memory. That's what I think I would go with if I was on Earth. If I was portaled into a fantasy world, that might change. But here in the mountains of Western Carolina, I think I would settle for something a little bit more humble.
Nothing too flashy.
No.
Same. I'd look for something low key, like the little brownies that clean your house. As long as you don't pay attention to them, that sounds great.
I'm going to go tabletop game again, but I would go with charm, really, like charm person, the ability to charm people. It's kind of low key because you'd really be hard to tell it if you could manipulate it right, but I think it would just do a world of difference in all kinds of situations.
But wouldn't that take you to the dark side like really, really, really fast?
It could. It really could.
Yeah, I mean, mind control or mind reading are always useful too, right?
That is a good one. That's awesome. All right, so we are kind of on the end of the podcast. So why don't you all take a chance, a couple of minutes, to tell the readers about your series, the one with your cool mage character, so that they can go look and check them out on Amazon. Let's start with Nathan, just for the heck of it.
Sure. Well, I'm writing Challenger's Call and Soulship. In Challenger's Call, Wes Malcolm is the disabled youth trying to use video games, virtual reality games, to get his balance back. And then he winds up waking in a world where he really does get stronger after he overcomes challenges, and that he can take that power back home and discover also all the capabilities he has that his disability and people discouraging him have tried to convince him he doesn't have. There's also Jasper in Soulship, who gets transported to a magical ship, and it mixes a sort of Eastern style of magic with meditation and improving your body and trying ways to use that. So Challenger's Call and Soulship on Amazon.
Very cool. Natalya.
My book is the Ballad of Emerald and Iron series, with the first book called Song of Shadow. The main character is Lorelei, and she is a mage who uses singing as her focus for magic, and she's on an epic quest to prove that there is a conspiracy going on with her empire, and she's not crazy about it.
Very cool. And how many books are out in the series so far?
The third one just came out today. Yay!
Congrats.
Third out of how many?
At least 12.
Nice. It's a good size series.
I guess I'll talk about my Stormwelder one, my first book, Stormwelder. It's the best place to start in any of my series, and it has, I think, the most interesting magic system with, like I was saying earlier, the 3 elements, the gods, the dark magic, and the main character that has no idea about any of this and is just stumbling along, destroying villages and burning down houses and things like that. And it throws you right into the action and right into the trouble, and then the poor kid gets swept up into saving the world, as you do in our books generally. And you can find it for free on Book Funnel as well, Stormwielder.
Ooh, awesome. Phil.
I wrote Chronicles of the Black Gate. That's my big epic fantasy with a bunch of point of views and, like I said, the dragons and nuclear Armageddons and stuff by the end of book 4 and book 5. So if you like constantly escalating epic action with a bunch of politics and magic and characters that I hope you find compelling as you read it, then Chronicles of the Black Gate's the way to go.
I'm super excited now to read the demon guy who spouts
if you like a little Jane Austen randomly thrown into your epic fantasy, then jump straight to book 3 and you'll be rewarded.
that sounds right up my alley, and just the weirdest and best ways. All right, and so that is it for our podcast today. Thank you guys so much for being around and hanging with us on the Fantasy Fiends podcast.
Thanks so much for having us, Andy.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks.
My pleasure. Appreciate it.
Have you guys back on sometime. And for those of you who are out there in Viewerlandia, stay tuned. Tomorrow night, we've got Scott Moon on the podcast talking something cool sci-fi. So we'll be back. See you tomorrow night.
Adios.
Bye.
There we go.
Ciao, hasta luego.